I remembered all by myself. Somebody be sure to tell Bogdan when he logs in. I didn't need him to remind me. And so what I'd love to do to get started is sort of answer any questions or hear any ahas that you had from Wednesday when we kind of finished up on the seller side and started to move to the buyer side. Anything that you heard that was unclear or that you wanted to be certain to underline? Nope.
So can you hear me?
Yes, Chelsea.
Okay. Hi, I'm sorry. I have two questions. One is I had to unfortunately miss Wednesday, and I tried
so
to
Chelsea,
watch
we can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me?
I can hear you. Maybe it's Rick again.
I know, because at the beginning I said stuff to him. Did you hear that he didn't hear me?
Okay, I fixed it. It was me again. So for those of you who were on Wednesday and then earlier today, I think this is the third time in 3 days that I've turned I don't know why my speakers keep turning off. I never turn my speakers off. I don't know what the problem is. So sorry, Chelsea, go ahead.
That's okay, no problem. At the beginning, I said hi back. I said hi to you and I asked if you had labs, and I thought it was weird you hadn't responded at all.
Yeah, that's why I was not ignoring you, I promise.
Yeah. So yeah. So two questions. So unfortunately I had to miss Wednesday's class, but I went to try to watch it yesterday and I couldn't find it on the YouTube page.
So
do you know if it would be there? But I didn't have a chance today to check. I just haven't had time yet.
Yeah, it could have been Maria and Adonis take turns each week uploading stuff. And
Okay.
I know it was out on Thursday. So it could have been Maria's week and she was out and Adonis didn't know she was out. So it is
fine.
likely up now.
Okay.
Because she was back today. So I would check on that and see if that popped up.
Okay.
My guess is yes.
Thank you. That was one question.
Yeah, and if for some reason it's not there, just text me and I'll make sure it gets up there.
Okay, thank you. So my other question is, I guess I don't necessarily know if it's specifically related to buyers, but I kind of wanted to get some feedback on, I had received some leads from an ad that I ran, and so I had been reaching out to them. And twice, as soon as I introduced myself and who I was calling from, it was couldn't even get another word out to ask. It was, oh, I was just poking around for fun. Click. Is there a different or a better way to kind of start with an opening?
No, my guess is that it's not your opening. My guess is that you said you ran an ad. So was that like Facebook ad?
So it was property. I borrowed agents, property to to show the property.
Right. But it was a Facebook ad.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So one of the things you have to recognize about Facebook ads is that you'll have more people who say, thanks, no, don't want anything, no, please don't call me, nope, just looking, nope, just poking around, nope. That's the nature of internet leads, right? So the reason that the volume is good is that somewhere in all that volume is some quality, but for the most part, the quantity sometimes is just quantity. What I would say is make sure that you have a good follow-up plan in terms of like a smart plan, email type follow-up, because sometimes what happens is people start poking around months before they're actually ready. It's why having the follow-up systems in place and the loyalty programs in place are what's more important than almost anything, because most of those leads, most internet leads are not immediate leads. Most internet leads are anywhere from 6 to 12, sometimes 18 months out before they actually convert, if they're going to convert. Again, that doesn't mean you can't find stuff that's more immediate. And I know that a lot of many of your colleagues have had really good responses in the last couple of months from some Facebook ads, but it's volume, right? You have to keep growing the volume to get more volume, to have more people show up who might be doing something now. So I don't think it's you. I think it's the nature of the leads. What I would encourage you to do is keep reaching out, right? For those people who say no, thanks, just looking. I'm assuming you have an email address. Set them up on something that you can follow up with, and put them in a tickle system where a month from now, or 2 months from now, or 3 months from now, you call them again to say, hey, just checking in. I know you were just playing around last time we spoke, wondering if that's changed, wondering if, whatever.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. That was what I was wondering. I did put them on a smart plan. I think I did either a 56-day or a 91-day, and kind of touches. And so I just wanted to make sure that was the appropriate follow-up to do too.
Yeah, you should write this down, because it's something to live. It's words to live by. The fortune is in the follow-up. The fortune is in the follow-up. And with internet leads, that's 110% gospel.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All righty. So, any other questions? Any successes from the week that you want to report? Any massive challenges from the week?
Hi, Rick. This is Erica.
Hello, Erica. How are you?
I am doing very well. Rick, I have that buyer. We had an accepted offer. Buyer has signed the contract. And unfortunately, we went ahead with an out-of-state mortgage broker who seemed to be not to perform. So I'm just sharing with the group, because it's a lesson for all of us. Question: at this stage of the process, when we had the inspection, we have the contract signed, can we change mortgage brokers from the buyer side?
Yeah, what I would do is I would either call Karen Mulreed or call Tammy Kranich and explain the issue, explain the tight time frame, and get them connected to somebody that's local that can get the job done, and then just let the listing agent know, look, this was going a little sideways, and so we wanted to make sure that we're making a change to make sure that we stay on track. Nobody should mind a change if it's a change made to make sure that the closing happens when the closing is supposed to happen.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. I truly appreciate that. Thank you, Rick.
You're welcome. And Erica brings up a really good point, guys. And I'll tell you what, I got to a point where, like, building that team around me of local people that I could trust, I got to a point where I would arm wrestle with buyers who decided not to use people inside of my team. I actually got to a point where I just chose not to allow it. Right? The conversation was, look, you said yes to me. When you hire me and my team, right? Because we work as a unit. We work as a unit. I understand your uncle is a home inspector, and yet your uncle being the home inspector does not do you any good. A, he's not a part of my team. I don't know your uncle from a hole in the wall. B, your uncle lives in Chicago, and so he's flying in to do your home inspection, right? He's not even necessarily a local home inspector. So what is he going to see that exists here that doesn't exist in Chicago that's going to cause problems? Oh, you have a New York attorney? Let me tell you how much of a pain that is, right? No New York attorneys. I love New York attorneys, except as it relates to them processing Connecticut real estate deals. New York attorneys are perfect for processing New York real estate deals. But for Connecticut real estate deals, you want a Connecticut-based attorney. And so you need to get better and better and better at guiding your buyer clients to use your team, period. right? And so I would add that to the consultation. Hey, here's the good news. Like, well, I'm like one-stop shopping. I'm like an all-inclusive, vacation. You hire me. You also hire my mortgage folks, my attorneys, my inspectors, all the people that I do tons of business with, who have been vetted and are absolutely looking out for you and your best interests, just like me. Don't roll the dice on people that you don't know and I don't know. Hey, let me ask this, and this is a trick question. I'm giving you a warning that this is a trick question. When you take your principles and practices courses, how many vendors in each field did your instructor tell you to make sure you gave out?
3.
3.
3, right? 3,
Yes.
always give out 3. No, don't do that. I still don't know why they tell you to do that. It drives me up a tree. That's actually not true. I do know why they tell you to do that. They tell you to do that because they think that by teaching you to give out 3 names and then having the buyer choose who they go into business with, that if something happens in that relationship, right, that somehow you won't be liable. Well, let me ask you this. Didn't you give them all 3 of those people? So if someone's going to be litigious, they're going to be litigious anyway. You don't get to step back and say, no, you picked them. No, you gave them to me. So don't give people 3 names. Vet a team and build a team around you that you know and trust. And then tell your buyers that those are the people that you work with. Right? This whole idea of pick a card, have a card, pick a card, any card, just because I don't want to get sued. Ugh, please, if someone's going to sue you, they're going to sue you whether you gave them 1 name or 27 names. That's just real. Not giving them 1 doesn't offer you any version of protection if you're afraid of getting sued for a relationship that goes sour. Plus, in 21 years, I have never, ever had either my own clients or extended through me as the broker of these offices, never had a client come back to us and say, you gave me that attorney and that attorney didn't do well by me, so therefore I'm suing you. That has never happened 1 time in 21 years. Can it happen? Sure, it can happen. But you could also get in your car and drive to Stop and Shop and have some issue happen to you in the parking lot of Stop and Shop, right? It doesn't stop you from going to the supermarket. Stuff can happen. There's a difference between possible and probable, right? The difference between possible and probable. I like to live my life and run my business from the perspective of probable. The only time I really get involved in possible is when I stick my attorney hat on and I'm working through contracts or working through operating agreements or, right? So I know that surprised some of you that I said that, but please take it to heart. Spend time building a great team. Maybe have a backup if you need somebody, right? I recently, literally after 21 years, had to have a backup attorney because what happened, and this was my own personal purchase, my attorney just simply couldn't perform because I need to close quickly. And what he knew was his title searchers were backed up for 6 or 8 weeks. And so he said, I'm sorry, but I can't help you. So I have my backup pop on in, right? But build that team. And the team needs to consist of the following people. You need a mortgage person or 2. You need an attorney or 2. You need an inspector or 2, both building and septic. You should have an insurance person on hand. Right, we're about to dive into an insurance opportunity for you guys that you heard me mention on Monday's 9 a.m. Zoom call. And so whether it's that opportunity or you have your own, make sure that you have a connection. What are the pieces of your team do you think you need? Any idea? Any thoughts?
I mean, those are the main ones, but you could maybe have a moving company if they're out of town.
Yeah, I love that idea, right? Have some kind of then maybe vendor list, right? So movers, you may want to have for the towns that you service, you may want to have like a landscaper or a snowplow person, right? That you give out. Here's what I've learned over time. If you give out their name enough times, they start to do your house for free. Woo! Right? One more reason why consolidation makes a whole lot of sense. Now, is it real that sometimes buyers come to the table with their own people? It is. I'm just going to encourage you to have some scripts to encourage them not to use their own people. And again, what that looks like is, Margaret, I understand that you've used that mortgage person a couple of times. My concern is that they work for Chase. And experience tells me that especially when times are moving quickly and the market is tight, big banks they're not nimble. They cannot perform the way a smaller local lender can perform. Besides, my experience tells me that regardless of how well you know that person at Chase, after 5 o'clock on a Friday, there is nobody that we can call until maybe 9 or 10 o'clock on a Monday. And I can tell you that a lot of real estate happens between 5 o'clock on Friday and 10 o'clock on Monday morning. Minimally, I'd like you to call this person, or you know what, better yet, I'll have them call you just to get to know them and use as a backup. And I'll tell you what, as soon as they got a hold of my person and we had some more conversation about the person at Chase, 9 times out of 10, they would make that switch, right? So have some scripts. Again, this is not you selling insurance, and this is not you selling your mortgage people. It's not you selling your attorney. It's inviting people to partake in the team that you've built to make sure that your transactions get to the closing table. When I tell you I used to arm wrestle my buyers, I got to a point where we would have arguments over inspectors because I had too many transactions fall apart because of really bad inspectors. So I did two things. I would argue with buyers on the inspection side, and I would have my sellers agree up front that one of the things that I had a do not fly list, like a no fly list for vendors. And there was this one guy, I don't know if he's still in business or not. Man, oh man. Here, wait, I'll stop the recording and I'll tell you his name. Man, oh man, was he horrible. He killed 2 transactions in a row for me. One, $1.5 million house, and another like $700,000 house. And so I just put him on the no-fly list. And what that meant was, as a listing agent, I would have a conversation with my sellers to say, look, if in fact we had an offer from a buyer and they choose to use this inspector, I'm advising you not to allow that inspector in your house. And they would say, well, what can we do? Like, we can tell them to get someone different. I'll give them a bunch of names if they're stuck on them. But you need to understand, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, that you're not putting your property in jeopardy by saying no to that. Because if he comes in and inspects your house, the buyers are going to walk away anyway. So either way, you're out buyers. And what I found was agents were more resistant to that idea when I would go back and say, hey, great news. We're all set for inspection at 12 noon on Wednesday. The only issue is you can't use the person that you were going to use. The seller won't allow them in the house. He comes with, his reputation precedes him, and they're asking you to find a different inspector. Agents would be all like, oh my God, it's the worst. How can you're terrible, you're horrible. Buyers, they're like, okay, whatever, I'll just hire someone different. Right? See how that works? Get real clarity around not everybody is good for your business. Surround yourself with people who are good for your business. And when you do, because they look to you for volume, I would win multiple offer bids because I would, as my client was writing up the offer, I would call my inspector and say, look, I'm writing up a multiple offer. I want to pre-schedule. We don't have it. We don't have the house yet, but I need you tomorrow at noon. And oftentimes what I would hear was, ugh, I already have something booked. Let me see what I can do to move it around for you, right? I was the one that got the favors done for me, because when I consolidated, everybody that I sold a house to used the same person, right? So they knew that I was a steady stream of income for them. I was like their best referral source. And that happened across the board. And so then I would hear back to say, you know what, I moved that appointment, or I got somebody else to cover that one. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do your inspection tomorrow. And then in a multiple offer scenario, we could simply go in and say, look, we're not going to do our inspections within 7 days. We've already scheduled our inspection for tomorrow at noon. So by saying yes to us, your seller doesn't have anything to lose, because they're going to know in 24 hours whether or not there are inspection issues. Right? Those are things that are attractive to sellers. You don't get that same kind of response or that same kind of attention if you use this one and then you use this one and then you use this one and you use that one, right? So consolidation is really very beneficial to everybody. Questions, comments, concerns about that? I know it was a little bunny trail, but.
I've got a comment. Isn't it possible that either the agent or the seller could think, oh, well, you just want your person because, you know, they're going to find something wrong with the place, and so you don't want them, or whichever side. I'm not making sense, but you know what I mean? Like they might think like we're sort of stacking the deck.
Well, I think that if that could be, if you're the listing agent and you're telling the buyer, is this what you mean? You're the listing agent, you're telling the buyer's agent that John Smith is not allowed in the house,
Yes.
but we have somebody that.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, they don't have to use the person that we've put on the table. They just can't use the person I'm excluding. So they can go hire anybody else. If you don't know anybody else, here are a couple of examples. And you know, at the end of the day, sure, people can think that, right? People sometimes also think that if they put money in escrow with the other side's attorney, somehow it's more at risk, because you know now your attorney doesn't have control of the money, somebody else's attorney has control of the money. Guys, the reality is, whether you put it in escrow with the buyer's attorney, the seller's attorney, or here in escrow, we're all escrow agents, and escrow agents are all treated the same under the law. The only way we can take money out of escrow is either by agreement of the parties or order of the court, right? So if we don't have agreement of the parties, the money stays in the escrow account. It doesn't matter who I represent. Right.
Okay.
So there are rules over and above a lot of this that I think sometimes people get they get nervous for not for reasons that aren't as relevant as they think they are. Does that answer that, Margaret? Yeah. And the other side of that is, yes, some people might think that. Some buyers, I would have buyers say, oh, well, you know, clearly you get kickbacks. And so my answer was, well, if you consider attention to my clients over everybody else's clients a kickback, well then yes, I get kickbacks. If you consider beneficial pricing for my clients because I pass this person so much business versus somebody else you might hire, well then sure, I get kickbacks. Although any and all of my kickbacks are only intended to benefit you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. Right? Because I'm not getting the kickback. They're not paying me. I get paid because they do a good job for you and we get to a closing. That's when I get paid. All righty. So let's dive back into where we were, which was the buyer consult. We were on step number 2, the needs analysis. And I think what I said was I was going to kind of walk you through this so that you could hear a little bit of what this sounds like. So let's start at the top of step number 2, the needs analysis and the mastering the buyer consultation scripts. I will take it from the top, and I may not need I may not need someone to be on the other side, because I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of go through the questions together so that you understand why we're asking them and how those things can come up. So if you remember from the setting the stage piece, you move into this by saying, let's switch gears and talk about the home that you want, right? I'm going to ask you a lot of questions in order to develop a clear understanding of what you're looking for in your next home. That way I don't waste your time by taking you to see properties that don't suit you, right? We talked about features and benefits when we went through that last time on Wednesday. So we move forward with the needs analysis. So our goal today is to help you create your top 5 must-have list for your next home. In order to help you do that, I'd like to have you start by describing for me the home that you are currently living in. And then you stop, close your mouth, open your ears, and you listen, and you take notes, right? Why are we asking them to start with the home they're currently living in?
It might be easier for them to articulate what they do and don't like about that current home to apply to a future home.
Yeah, that's 100% right, Margaret. Oftentimes people get a little stuck, right? When you ask them, hey, tell me about the house you're looking for. So we want to help them model for themselves what the exercise they're about to do is. So we start them start them off by having them do something easy. They can just kind of close their eyes and picture where they're living now. It's a far easier process. They know the answers. Remember, everybody wants to look good and be right, right? So we want to set it up where they look good and are right because they're answering all the questions without struggle. So we ask them to start going through that process to help them model the next piece. Why else do we ask them to start with the home they're living in? There's another reason. That is the primary one, but there is another one. What do you think they might uncover as they're going through their house? How about things that they like about where they live and things that they don't like so much about where they live, so they can use those tools to help them describe for you what it is they're looking for, right? If their most favorite part of it's definitely Friday afternoon. If the thing they enjoy the most in their home is their fireplace in their living room, and that comes up over and over again. Oh, but man, the reason we bought the house, the fireplace in the living room. Oh, my favorite thing to do in the house, on a snowy afternoon, sit and read a book by the fire. Oh man, I just love the fire. My kids love when we have a fire, and I love the smell of the fire, and right? All about the fireplace. You can pretty much bet they're going to be looking for some version of a fireplace in the next house, right? And if it doesn't come up on the top 5, and you've heard it over and over again about how much they love that fireplace, I would certainly ask the question, hey, what about the fireplace? Are you willing to let that go? Oh, no, man, good thing. Right? So it might help them figure out what to talk about, what they want to keep, and what they definitely want to jettison, right? When they tell you about their home and about the small bedrooms that they have that they've just outgrown, well, now they're pretty clear on why they're moving and what they're looking for. They need more space, right? They need more space in the bedrooms, that kind of thing. So you just kind of walk them through it, right? You should write this down because it's one of the best scripts ever in terms of being a consultant. I use it on you guys all the time. It's the what else? Right? When I ask a question, someone answers, and I say, hey, love that answer. What else? What else? And I what else you until nobody has an answer, and then we move on. I encourage you as consultants, whether it's on the list side or the buy side, use that simple script and strategy to make sure that people have given you what they want to give you. Right? One of the things that I think you need to steer clear of is asking a question. Well, there's 2 things. Don't ask a question and then turn around and answer it. Any of you know anybody who does that? Like you ask a question or they ask a question, and as you're answering it or before you can even formulate the answer. They answer the question already. I'm like, okay, why did you ask me? Why did you ask me? If you already knew the question or the answer to the question, why did you bother to ask? That drives me bonkers. Or someone who asks a question wow, I can't think of the second one. It's definitely late on a Friday. I think I never taught this class before. And so there's a second one that escapes me at the moment. But you got the point on the first one, right? So take good notes, keep asking questions, use what else. And the other thing I want you to do here and in the next section when they're talking about the house that they will move to is I want you to get really good at using the two cues, right? I talked about the two cues before. Anyone remember what the two cues are? Two cues are quantify and qualify, right? Quantify and qualify. So as a consultant, if someone says to you, you know, well, we know we're coming from a pretty big house. Excellent. Can you describe how big is big? What do you mean by big? Right? Do you think that when I say small yard, that each of us has a, you know what, here, I'll give you a quick quiz. Close your eyes a second and picture a brown dog. Now, open your eyes. I'm not sure why I had you close your eyes because you're all staring at a computer screen, but it was fun to watch you do it. Do you think that the brown dog that Nicole thought of is the same exact brown dog as the one that Connie thought of? As what John thought of, what Margaret thought of, what Diane thought of, right? I'm certain that if we had the time to ask you to unmute and tell what kind of dog each of you thought about, or put it in the chat, like write it down so you're not influencing each other, you'd all be thinking of a different dog. Some of you thought of little foo-foo dogs, some of you thought of big dogs, some of you thought of like medium-sized dogs, some of you thought of a brown dog that you used to have, some of you thought of the dog that is running around your feet right now because you have a brown dog. But if that doesn't help us get clarity around what it is you currently have. And it's important to know, because if you do have the shaggy flea-bitten dog with drool, right, or a dachshund, if you do have that and you're looking to move similar to that or move away from that, we have to get specific, right? Maybe a silly example, but it's the same kind of thing, right? Do you think that big yard means something different for someone who says that to you, who's moving from downtown LA versus Iowa, right? Big yard is two completely different things. You're moving from LA, big yard is, you know, more than a postage stamp. You're moving from the Great Plains, you're coming from Iowa or from Wyoming, right? You look at people weird if they don't have at least 50 acres. You get my point, right? So quantify and qualify so that you get as much data as possible and you prep people to understand that when they get to the next section, which is describe the house that you're looking to purchase, we're going to ask you a lot of those same questions. So if you say I'm looking for a large yard, and you said you had a large yard in the first piece, and we dug a little deeper, now you're prepared, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. We're going to dig a little deeper on that for you as well. So you get that data, you what else them to death until they say, you know what, I can't think of anything else. Great. The good news is you're done when they're done. And you can thank them for sharing that and then move through the script to say, now I'd like you to describe the home that you're looking for. Right? In the middle of this script says, remember, the needs analysis doesn't necessarily always follow a specific script. And as a matter of fact, I will tell you that the needs analysis done really well doesn't follow a script at all, because you're simply listening to the brain dump that's going on by the buyer. Listening intently, asking additional questions on each of those things that they might say. Now, at the bottom of this page, you do have some questions that typically are going to be asked as things come up. Let's go through them. First one, can you describe what that looks like? Right, so if I asked you guys to close your eyes again and picture a brown dog, right? In order to get more clarity, I might ask Connie, you know what, so tell me what that looks like. Describe the brown dog for me. Because now she's going to say, oh, well, it's, you know, it's tall and it kind of, you know, weighs 112 pounds and it's got kind of curly, bushy, almost like cotton-like hair. Like, all right, now I'm starting to think of like a poodle or something. But I get more clarity when she starts to describe it for me. So a simple question, if you need more info, is, can you describe what that looks like to you? Can you describe that for me? Right, I use a version of that with you guys again all the time. John asks a question and I'm not 100% sure I know what he means. My response is almost always the same. Can you keep asking that question? That's how I typically ask it. I keep filling me in on that because I'm not quite sure I get it. Instead of me asking a question that I think I know the answer to. Did I tell you guys the story about little Johnny and little Tommy? No, I didn't. Okay, I don't think so. So here's a quick story to illustrate this point. So little Johnny is 9. And he comes home off the bus one day from school and he comes in. His mother's in the kitchen doing whatever she's doing. And little Johnny comes in and says, Mommy, where do I come from? And his mother's like, oh man, really? 9 years old? I thought I had more time. Frankly, I thought his father was going to have this conversation with him, but he's not home. I wasn't prepared for this. I'm like, you know, preparing dinner or whatever I'm doing. But she thinks, okay, well, you know what? Clearly he's asked that for a reason, so I'm going to address it. And so she sits little Johnny down and she explains in detail exactly where Johnny comes from. The whole birds and bees conversation. She does the best she can. And so she finishes that conversation and little Johnny is sitting there like, not knowing quite what to say, not quite expecting what he heard. And his mother says to him after he's finished, you know, do you have any questions? And he shakes his head no. And she says, I'm curious, what prompted you to come home and ask me that today? And he looks at his mother and says, well, I was on the bus and Tommy said he was from Detroit, so I was just wondering where I was from. But I'm bummed, right? But what's the point? Had his mother asked some clarifying questions, right? If she had said to him, instead of answering the first question that he asked, if she had said to him, oh, honey, it's so curious that you asked that question. What made you come home and ask that today? And he would have asked, oh, got it. She would have been off the hook, right? And it just illustrates that when we don't ask more questions, we are sometimes answering the wrong question. Sometimes, like, we miss it by a mile. So continue to ask these questions to make sure that you're getting clarity with the client and helping the client create clarity for themselves. So the second question on your list, like how big is big, how small is small? Like we kind of already talked about that. You need to have them qualify or quantify that, depending on what that looks like. I love number 3. And I'll tell you, number 3 is probably one of the most underutilized questions in consulting. And that's, why is that important to you? I one time had a couple tell me that what they really needed was a big flat backyard. Now, of course, I when I was working with buyers, I did a majority of my work in ridge field. Now, notice that's not called flat field, it's called ridge field for a reason, right? We don't have a whole lot of flat land here. We're built on 3 ridges, which means everything's a hill. So the question became, so can you describe what that looks like for you? How big is big? And she said to me, well, I think we need probably 1 acre or 2. Great, can you describe for me why that's important to you? And what she said next gave me some clarity. She said, I have 3 boys and they're all soccer players. And I need some place on my property that they can practice and play soccer. Well, guess what? One of the things that I learned, I was not a big soccer player, but one of the things I can tell you about playing soccer with a round ball is that if you have flat land that's not quite flat, right? I had a term for flat land in Ridgefield. It was called Ridgefield Flat. Most of you would say, okay, that's a hill. Nope, that's called Ridgefield Flat, right? Because it's not this steep, it's not a mountain. It's kind of somehow undulating. Let's use that word. But Ridgefield Flat for this particular purpose is not going to work all that well, because she had 3 boys who were crazy soccer players, and they were not going to be running down the hill chasing the ball all the time. You know how we solved that issue? We solved that issue by having a conversation that said, look, let's, just so we're clear, now I understand why having that flat land is important to you. That may be a struggle purchasing in this particular town, simply because there's not a whole lot of flat land, and the land that is flat oftentimes isn't 1 acre or 2 acres wide. I mean, we don't necessarily build houses on soccer fields, right? So there might be a portion of flat land, but it's not necessarily big enough to have a whole soccer field going on. Said, what if we considered, would it make sense to you if we considered looking for properties where the boys could walk to more public land? She said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, we've got a high school, we've got 2 middle schools, we've got 6 elementary schools. There are a couple of parks. And a lot of the flat land has been scooped up by all of those places. So what if we found you the house you were looking for that didn't necessarily have the land you were looking for, but the boys could walk next door or walk through the woods behind the house to play on the field at the school? And that ultimately is what we did. We found them a property that was kind of just walkable to an elementary school that, for the most part, after 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon and on weekends, was completely accessible to her children. Her children were old enough, they were like middle school and almost middle school, so they were certainly old enough to not be in a fenced-in, yard in the back. But so I tell you that story because it just goes to show that when someone says, I need this, if you don't ask more questions and you don't understand why they need it, why it's important to them, it's tough for you to try and figure out whether or not that need can be satisfied with something else, if in fact the exact thing they're looking for doesn't show up. I one time asked that question about land as well, and someone said, well, I'm an avid gardener. I said, excellent, I'm curious, have you ever terrace gardened? She said, no. And I said, well, with not a whole lot of flat land around, do you think that's something that you could terrace might be kind of a new challenge to your gardening skills? And she said, well, yeah, absolutely. So all of a sudden, that whole idea of flat land kind of went away. They bought something with a little flat land, but certainly that terrace gardening, that was where she ended up going. So, right, helping people through the conversation of why is it important to you ultimately gives them clarity and helps you troubleshoot things before you even show them the first house. Make sense? So let's run through the rest of these questions real quick. What exactly do you mean by large kitchen? What exactly do you mean by that, right? That doesn't make you sound like you don't know what you're doing or not listening. You're just asking for more clarity. What does having blank accomplish for you, right? Say kind of a similar way to ask, why is that important to you? Right, I could say, John, you've mentioned the fireplace a whole bunch of times. I'm curious, what does having that fireplace accomplish for you and your family? And John will give me some kind of an answer, right, around why the fireplace itself is important, if that's come up a bunch of times. Talk to me some more about that. Tell me some more about that. I showed you this one the other day, like what happens if we cannot find that specific feature? Right, remember the indoor pool guy I was telling you about? So make sure you have that one at the ready. Ah, wow. I'm curious, what happens if we can't find that specific feature? It's a great question, isn't it? Because the answer could be, well, then we probably won't move here. Wow, okay. I ran into that once. Gentleman from Fort Worth. This is a different 4-car garage guy. I told you a story of a 4-car garage person the other day. This is a different 4-car garage guy. Someone coming in from Fort Worth who was flabbergasted that the only properties he was seeing had 1 or 2-car garages. Where are all the rest of your garages? He kept asking. That and his kids were fascinated with basements, because apparently in Fort Worth, there's not a whole lot of basements in properties, right? Anybody from Fort Worth? So we would go into a new house. The kids would leave us immediately and run and find the basement and then go down the basement. They thought it was so cool that the house was above them. And then the last two, again, helps you help them troubleshoot around things that they might get stuck on, right? So Margaret, when you say extra space for the kids, do you see that as a finished basement, an extra bedroom, or something more like a playroom or bonus room over the garage? Or would an appropriately sized or even oversized family room as a part of just the kind of the regular house suffice? Right? Extra room for the kids, we don't have enough to work off of yet. And the concern is, if you don't ask the question to get clarification around that, you'll keep showing property that you think has plenty of room for the kids. And yet, because you haven't really gotten clarity around what that looks like, the client keeps thinking, oh, no room for the kids, no room for the kids. When you ask additional questions, now you know that these folks would be happy with a large family room. Let's quantify large, like what does large look like for you? Or a bonus room over the garage, but they're not into having the kids play in the basement. Right, so finished lower level, that's out for them. Not going to work. I've had people like that. I don't want that, but I'll be okay with this, right? Extra room for the kids. Great, can you tell me what's the use of, or they say, I need 5 bedrooms. Excellent, talk to me about that. What's the makeup of your family? Well, it's me and my husband and 2 kids. Great, so talk to me about the use of those bedrooms. Well, 1 for each of us. We may have another child, so we're looking to make sure that there's an extra bedroom. And we need a guest room because my parents come in twice a month to watch the kids when I go to work or whatever, right? Or perhaps the conversation is I need 5 bedrooms because I work from home. We need a home office. Got it. And so I'm curious, if the house had 4 actual bedrooms and an extra space that could be used as an office, either a den or a finished lower level or whatnot, would that make sense? Or else they said 5 bedrooms, you didn't ask any more questions, and you're off chasing 5-bedroom houses, right? 5-bedroom houses in certain price points are not easy to find. And yet all along, 4 bedrooms with an extra something for them to have a home office in would have been okay, right? So you have to keep digging and keep diving into exactly what it is they're looking for. And then, of course, you need to be asking each time, so I'm curious, do you think that item goes on your top 5 must-have list? Because remember, you're taking notes, they're talking, you're what elsing them, you're asking additional questions. Why is that important to you? Getting down to them looking at that big long list of 77 things I just mentioned, say, okay, now we got to pick 5. So of all of these things you just talked about, which do you think is absolutely the most non-negotiable for you? And they write that one in. Great, if we could add a second one, if we could add a third one, a fourth one, a fifth one. Oh, you're out of space. Sorry. No number 6. You gotta love only 5. Making sense? And so that's how you help them build the top 5 must-haves. Any questions about the top 5 must-have list? And about the needs analysis you're going to do, the questions you'll ask to get good answers to make sure that you have the information you need and they have the information they need to populate this list. What do you notice about this top 5 must-have list at the bottom? Hello, is this thing on? Hello?
Have the buyers keep track?
Yes, what do you notice about the bottom of the form? What do they have to do?
They have to sign it.
Yeah, they have to sign it. All right, they have to sign it. And why? Because we sign important documents, right? We want to make sure that they understand that this is part of the process and we're going to keep this document front and center and use it to help them assess homes. I can tell you that there are some agents who process the top 5 must-have list, stick it in their folder, and never use it again. They never look at it again. I will encourage you, use this as a tool to help you and them focus in on properties that make sense for them to buy. Again, if you don't want to go down the path of showing somebody 77 different houses before they purchase, these are the tools that can help you fast track that on their behalf. I can tell you most buyers don't want to look at 34 houses, regardless of what they say. That's a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of potential shag carpet, right? So help them fast track that. They want to get this done as well. They want to find the right house, the best house. So help them, by using this tool, help them eliminate properties so that you can find them that best property.
That's some dirty shag carpet.
Yeah, indeed. Yuck. Here's another tip. Never express your opinions about something in a house. You can echo their opinions if you so choose after you hear them, but don't ever offer your opinions. I did that one time. We walked into a house. It was just like this sunken living room. Oh, and it had the most god-awful carpet with the worst painted walls. Now, again, paint colors, you can change that immediately. But I made the mistake of saying, whoa, mamma mia, what is going on in this room? And they looked at me and said, you don't like it? Oh my God, we think this room is awesome. Like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I meant to say. I meant, what's going on in this room? I have never seen something more beautiful in my entire life. Oh, it was hideous, hideous, right? But it's not for me to say, like, hideous is in the eye of the beholder, I guess. Right? So once somebody comes in and says, wow, this is awesome, you can certainly say, well, yeah, I am so glad that you love it. Or if someone comes in and says, oh, goodness me, like who threw up on the walls in this room? Then you can go ahead and mirror that if you so desire. All right, let's move on from the top. Yes.
Rick, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you find that when doing these, I mean, right now it's kind of an odd time because of COVID and the pandemic, but I mean, do you find that this is kind of your results seem to be better with this if you meet them in their current home, if they meet you at the office, or versus virtually?
Great question. I would say either in the office or on Zoom. You're not going to their house.
Okay.
Unless you're also going to be listing their current house, right? So then you might do a walkthrough of their house and maybe have a buyer consult at the same time. But generally speaking, with buyers, you're either meeting them in the office the first time, or you're meeting them on Zoom the first time, and then meeting them in the office for just a quickie, hi, how you doing, get to know you, and then you head out.
Okay, I'm glad I asked that because my inclination would have actually been opposite, would have been that I can gain a lot of like introspective by being in what they're currently in, seeing what they're currently in, but
Yeah, well,
that's good to know.
just remember, buyers come in all different shapes and sizes, and what I mean by that is, not every buyer is geographically close. And so,
True.
right, so you're certainly not driving over into, Tarrytown to meet them in their house, or
Yep.
New Jersey, or flying out to California. Clearly, that's not what you meant. But the point is, the idea of sellers, you do need to be in the house, generally speaking, because you need to kind of see what the product is. Buyers, but even with sellers, you're going to meet them once at their house and then pull them into the office or on Zoom, one of the two, right? You're not going back to their house to have the consult. I just find that there's a lot of distraction there, and people are more attached to their home when they're sitting in it. So I like to get them out of it if all possible, or again, in current circumstances, via Zoom. All right, so let's finish up the needs analysis. Back to the script. So from our conversation, let's take a look at what you've determined are your top 5 must-haves for your next home. I'm curious, is there anything on this list that should not be, or anything that we are missing, right? You're going to make sure you keep checking to make sure that they're in agreement on that. Let's just take a moment to prioritize this list so that these 5 are in order of importance, right? Sometimes the way they write them down is not necessarily in order of importance. So you want to just take a moment and ask them to see if there's a priority there. Then you move into a couple of quick questions. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, is there anything about the home buying process that you're unsure or nervous about? Do you have any concerns or hesitations that you'd like to share with me? Right, so you're just asking them, ultimately, you're asking them to do a little bit of a brain dump about anything that might have them be stuck. Right, I asked that one time and they said, well, we're a little unsure of the process. How does it work if we go out today and see property and like one of them? How does it work with our lease? Like, well, keep asking me that question. Talk to me about your lease. How long is your lease? And they said, oh, well, we just signed it 2 months ago. We have 10 more months in our lease. Like, oh, okay. Right. Oops, I didn't ask enough questions up front. I didn't get that piece of information. So luckily I asked that question and it came out there. They were unsure how it would work when they were going to buy a house with 10 months in the lease. I'll tell you what we did. I didn't kick them back. I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go back to your landlord and I want you to have a conversation right now. I want you to have this conversation. Look, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, I know we just signed our lease and we love living in your unit. However, we do want to take advantage of the opportunity the market affords us right now and purchase a house. Right? We just got left a little bit of money, or I just got a bonus at work. And so we didn't think we'd be ready, but we're ready sooner. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to have your cooperation in allowing us out of our lease early. Once we know when our closing date is, we will pay for every month that you have a vacancy. And my agent who's selling us our house is more than willing to list your rental at no cost. And we'll cover any fee that has to be paid to somebody else who brings a tenant. So it's no cost to you. We'll replace ourselves if you'll allow us to exit the lease. What landlord is going to say no to that? Right? So we just worked with their landlord. Interestingly enough, the landlord actually found somebody on their own once we had that, which is why you send them back and have the conversation early. The landlord started to do some talking around, found new tenants. We coordinated the closing, and the clients who bought the house for me didn't have to pay anything extra. They got their full security back because the landlord went seamlessly from one tenant to the next tenant. There was no drop in rent for him. I didn't have to list the property. The buyers didn't have to cover any expenses to pay the landlord's agent, the tenant's agent, right? Everybody won. So it's just a matter of helping people have the right conversations early enough so that you can solve some of those problems. Now, had I not asked those questions and not found that out until later in the transaction, we may have had trouble. We maybe still would have gotten agreement, but we may have had trouble making it seamless. And now it costs more money. It costs me money. It costs the buyers money because there's a hole in the rent. Make sense? I've also just to give you some thoughts about working with renters who are buying for the first time. I've also in more buyers-based markets where sellers are anxious to have somebody say yes to their house, right? That's not the current environment we're in. However, trust me, it happens quickly, right? You'll be in a seller's market today, but by February we might be in a buyer's market again. So have these strategies in your head. One of the things that I did one time with tenants who were looking to purchase in more of a buyer's market was we had a conversation with the seller of the property that they were looking to purchase. Say, look, we're looking to make an offer on the property. We're going to make an offer that makes sense for everybody. However, as part of that offer, we're looking to you to cover the remainder of the lease. They have 3 more months in their lease. And they can't afford to buy your house and cover the 3 months of the lease on the tail end. And so the seller said, well, how much is it? It was like $1,000 a month. So it was a $3,000 concession on the seller side. When I did that, that seller would have happily paid $5,000, $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 to have those buyers buy their house because it was a buyer's market and the sellers were desperate to get their home sold, right? So the market dictated a little bit how we played that, but don't be afraid to work with tenants and renters who maybe seem like they're addressing this too early, because there are ways that you can help move them forward. And then, of course, a conversation about money. Now, I encourage you to have this conversation when you're qualifying the buyer, and yet some people choose to have this exact conversation just earlier, or they have it during the consultation as a refresher, right? And the conversation is, remind me, will you be paying cash for the property, or do you require financing? Why do you ask it that way? Instead of just assuming they need financing. It's a pretty simple reason. It just makes them feel good. Right? Makes them feel good. They're buying a $600,000 house and your question is, will you be paying cash? Oh my goodness. Huh. No, I'm not, but thank you so much for thinking I could. Right? And of course, making sure that they've spoken to a lender or a mortgage broker before you meet with them is imperative. You're going to have them bring that document. Any other questions on the needs analysis? No? Okay. So the next couple of pages in your packet are tons and tons and tons of questions, right? They're to help you help yourself get better and better at asking more questions. There are questions about the dining room, there are questions about the land, there are questions about the kitchen, there are questions about all this stuff, right? So you can just kind of review those on your own to make sure that you have a bunch of questions ready to use in your arsenal. Which moves us to the steps 3 and 4. Step 3 is share your value proposition, and step 4, educate your buyers. We're also not going to spend a ton of time in class reviewing steps 3 and 4, and here's why. A lot of people utilize steps 3 and 4, share your value proposition and educate your buyers, as conversations either in the car between houses or after a house, right? If you're in separate cars, after a house where you're asking about whether or not that property works for them. And, oh, by the way, did you notice that radon mitigation system in the basement of that house? Did you have any questions around that? Right? People who aren't from our area look at radon and they have like no idea what it is. And sometimes people come and think that radon is like the scourge of the planet. It's going to kill us all. Hey, let me ask this question. This is always a fun question. I think I'm down to, I think Connie's camera is frozen. Chelsea's off. Nicole went to make dinner. I think we have Margaret and John. Oh, and there's Effie. There we go. I love when you turn your cameras on. Oh, and there's Seth. Oh, and there's Chelsea. Oh my goodness, peer pressure, peer pressure. I love it. So let's talk a little bit about this, and it's a little bit of a bunny trail, but it's an important topic. Now, Margaret turned her camera off just to spite me.
I didn't know how I did that. I think it's because my battery's low. I meant to
there
plug
you
it
go.
in, but keep talking.
Yeah, there you go. So let me ask this question about radon. Is radon a health hazard?
Only if it's over a certain limit.
So
Radon
only
ex-
if it's over a certain level.
Radon exists around us all day, every day.
Right. So
Everywhere.
here's why I asked that question. It's a little bit of a trick question, but it gets the conversation going in a direction that I think is important for you to understand. And that is, I want you to get clarity around dealing with pieces of our industry as they relate to the business, right? Radon is something that simply exists in Fairfield County, right? Radon is a naturally occurring gas. It occurs, for those of you who don't know what it is, it occurs from the decay of, I think it's uranium, in the earth, and then kind of seeps up through the cracks in ledge, right? What do you know about Fairfield County? Tons of ledge.
On rock.
So when you build an entire county on the rock where the radon seeps up through all the cracks, guess what ends up in our basements and in our homes? Radon, right? Now, the reality is, so let me ask this. If radon comes back, right? Effie mentioned the EPA standard. The EPA standard for radon is air,
Or
right? 4 picocuries per liter of air, and in water, anybody know the water? 5,000 per picocuries per liter of water, right? Now those are EPA guidelines that say anything above that should be mitigated. So let me ask this: the buyer goes to buy a house, they test for radon, the radon comes in high. What does the seller have to do?
put in a remediation system.
So I love that answer. It is not the right answer, but I do love that answer.
Nothing.
Not that
Seller,
Yeah, nothing, not in this market.
right? The seller has to do 0, right? The seller has no requirement, right? Connecticut is an as-is state. So the laws of the state of Connecticut do not require radon to be addressed. So when I asked you before, is radon a health hazard? That's actually a trick question, because in your business, now you can decide to do all the research you want personally to understand radon because you live here too, right? However, the business person, the business owner, the operator that you are in real estate, you get to have a business take on radon. And what I mean by that is, if you Google radon, right, you'll get 1,000 websites that tell you that radon is going to kill us all because it is carcinogenic, it's horrible, it's terrible. You also will find 1,000 other websites that will tell you that radon is not harmful almost in the least, right? That you're more apt to get struck by lightning while flying in a plane than you are to die of cancer given by radon if you are locked in a basement with radon levels twice the guideline limit for 50 years or so. I mean, some ridiculous number. Now, which do I think is true? I don't have an opinion on it. And I choose not to have an opinion on it because I want to make sure that you hear that the idea of radon, right, with your clients, it's not necessarily your expertise or your place to make a comment about whether or not it's a health hazard. Have people asked me, so, what's the whole deal with radon? Yes. My answer is you will need to determine whether or not you believe it's a health risk on your own. You can speak to your doctors, you can do some research, you can determine the health risk of radon on your own. I'm here to guide you through a conversation that talks about the business risk of radon. The business risk of radon, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, is that if your test came in at 6 picocuries per liter of air and you don't care about it, when you go to sell this house, the buyer that you sell to may care about it. And so now the mitigation system is going to be on your dime. So the right business move here is to ask the seller to mitigate the system on your behalf, whether or not you think it's a health risk or not. Because now the system is in place. And so when you go to sell the property, any readings that come in, the system's in place. You don't have to spend the money to put the system in. You may just have to have an adjustment to the system made if the testing doesn't come out properly. You see my point? Where if you keep that as a business conversation, you don't end up having to A, be the expert about what's a health risk and what's not a health risk. And B, you don't have to engage in emotion, right? Because whether or not you live in a house with radon, for people who don't think it's a health risk, is not much of a conversation. Whether or not you buy a house with radon in it, for people who think that it will kill them and their children instantly, and there are people who think that, right? That's a different conversation. Up front, the conversation with buyers is, oh, I'm not sure you're going to be able to live here. We may need to find you a different county to live in, right? If you're that scared of radon. I encourage you, do some research, have some conversations with your doctor, right, around that. You getting my point? Questions, comments, concerns? All right.
I have a question, Rick, not necessarily about radon, but just in general. What are the standard inspections you should get? Like, you know what I mean? There's termites, there's radon, there's obviously well if there's well, but is there a general list?
Yeah, there is, and it's inside of the anatomy of a buyer transaction, which we're going to get to on Monday. So if you'll hold that question, we're going to get to it on Monday.
Yep, no problem.
So my point is, these steps, value proposition and educate your buyers, they're here for you to chunk down and use as you need to, right? You may want to ask somebody if they've ever purchased property in Connecticut before, because if they haven't, well, then there's a conversation about this being an as-is state and what inspections are really for, right? We're going to have a longer conversation around that when we get to anatomy of a buyer transaction on Monday as well. You may want to talk about radon. You may want to talk about buried oil tanks. You may want to talk about, how when the money it needs to come to the table, right? So these educate your buyer conversations, you can chunk down and utilize if and when there's a lull in conversation. Now, recently somebody said to me, well, these conversations seemed better when we were putting people in our cars. Like, yeah, I get that. However, I personally believe that even if you're not putting somebody in your car, you miss way too much by not staying connected, driving between the houses. You all have cell phones. Dial them up on the cell phone and put it on speaker so you guys can talk with the clients driving from house to house. That makes each of these little blurbs in these scripts far more relevant, because now you have an opportunity in between houses to not only stay connected to them, but also educate them and answer questions that they may be struggling with and not asking you, right? That's another thing I have learned over time. People sometimes struggle and they don't bring up the struggle. They don't ask a question. Remember, people in general want to look good and be right. And so sometimes asking a question, people feel like they maybe don't look good or they're not right about it. So therefore they hold the question. If you bring these conversations up and walk them through it, even if you're just on the phone in between houses, you get to answer questions that alleviate stress and help educate them more, which will help them as they move through an offer process. Any questions about anything we just talked about? All righty. Step number 6, close for the agreement. So you've set the stage, you've given them the expectations about this is a hiring conversation. You then had a full-blown needs analysis where they developed their top 5 must-have list. You asked if there were any questions. You talked about their financing a little bit. You worked through any issues that might have come up. And now you're ready to move into the step that actually has them hire you. So what I'd like to do is do 2 things. In your packet, towards the back, you do have an example of the exclusive right to represent buyer contract. Right? You're going to want to haul that out. If you have it on the screen, we're going to get to it in a minute. If you printed it already, you can haul that sucker out. And so what I want to do is I'm going to run through the script for close for the agreement. And then we're going to actually go through the agreement and then just run through the script for close for the agreement one more time after you've listened to what the agreement itself actually has to say. Would that be helpful? Okay. So here's where we go after our needs analysis and any other questions that you answer on their behalf. So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, if it's all right with you, I'd like to get down to the legalese portion of our meeting. As you know, it is Connecticut state law that you and I work under a written agreement of representation. After all that we have discussed this morning, can you see how it would benefit you to have somebody looking out for your best interests as you search for the best home and negotiate its purchase? Of course, they say yes. So this form allows you to officially hire me so that we can move forward with finding a home for you. It outlines all of my duties to you and all of your duties back to me in this partnership. It also outlines how I get paid. Most of the time, my compensation is paid by the seller through the multiple listing service. So for all intents and purposes, you get to have all of my services for free. Woohoo! There may be certain circumstances, such as me showing you a for sale by owner, or a home that for some reason or other is offering little to no compensation to the buyer's agent. In circumstances like those, you may be asked to pay for a portion of or the entire commission. However, we will discuss any of these homes first prior to you seeing them so that you fully understand your financial obligations should you choose to pursue those few exceptions. The good news is this: 98% of all the homes that we see together will not require that conversation, and you will always have ample notice of any homes that do. Furthermore, this document goes on to explain that at all times I must abide by both federal and state fair housing laws, which means I may not be able to specifically answer some of your questions. However, I will always guide you to a resource that can. Does that make sense? Great. So all it's left to do now is sign the contract and we are off. And then of course, after they sign the contract, you want to validate that for them by saying, you know what, you've made an excellent decision here today. I am so excited to get started. Let's go do it. So that's the script. And oftentimes what people ask me is, do you go line by line by line through the contract? My answer is no. This script was written as an overlay to this contract, right? So the script itself outlines and details enough of what's going on in the contract to give people an understanding of it. Some people will then go ahead and sign it. Some people will look to review it and sign it. Some people will ask you to go through it line by line. It's because I want you to really understand what this contract says, in case people ask you questions so you can explain it, that we will spend a good probably 15 or 20 minutes or so going through this document line by line, because I want you to know what it says. Trust me when I tell you, it is very uncomfortable when you put a contract down in front of someone's person to sign, and they ask you a question and say, you know, could you just explain paragraph 6 to me? The first time that happened to me, I don't know that I had fully read what I had put down in front of them. So when they asked me to explain paragraph 6, I thought, oh, absolutely, absolutely. Hold on one second. I should probably read that first so I can figure out if I can explain it to you or not. I felt like an idiot, right? I worked my way through it, and I think I covered my tracks, but I felt like a real bozo because I hadn't prepared for the question of, can you explain this piece to me, right? So I want to run through this with you so that you are armed with the information that you need to make sure that if you're put in that position, you can explain what's going on in this contract. However, from a process perspective, I like to utilize the script as an overlay, because oftentimes that's all you need. It outlines kind of the basic premise of what we're talking about in the contract, and then they get to review and sign the contract. So let's go through the contract. Everyone has their copy of the contract? Let's go through it. We're going to go through line by line. I know it looks long, but we'll get through it quickly. And then I want to go through the script again, because I think it will make better sense to you once you've seen what the contract actually says. Sound good? Okay, Connie says yes, so we're moving forward. The exclusive right to represent buyer. It starts at the top with Connecticut law prohibits a real estate broker or salesperson from representing or negotiating on behalf of a buyer unless a buyer signs a written agreement of representation, right? Now that is true. The law in our state says that buyer agency has to be done in writing, right? There's no implied version of that. There's no, well, because you were in my car, you're my client, right? You have to have a written agreement of representation to validly represent a buyer. It's the law. Paragraph 1, exclusive right. The buyer, whose names you put in there, right, appoints Keller Williams Realty as the buyer's exclusive agent for the purpose of assisting buyer to acquire an interest in suitable real estate acceptable to the buyer. Now, the names that go in there are the buyers, right? If you have Tom and Sally Smith, well, then Tom and Sally Smith go in there. If Tom and Sally are buying the house with Sally's mother because they can't afford the house on their own, and mom is going to be a part of the decision-making process and on the deed, well, then guess what? You need to represent her as well. So then all three names go in there, right? Whoever's purchasing the house needs to jump on that document. Number 2, geographic area. This appointment can be limited by the buyer to the following area of the state of Connecticut. Tell me what goes in there.
Each and every town or nothing?
So each and every town, I love that answer, John, right? Each and every town. So if you're representing somebody in Wilton and Weston and Westport and Norwalk, well, then you're going to list out Wilton, Westport, Weston, Norwalk. If somebody starts in Danbury and decides they want to move and start buying a property in Newtown or in Bethel, and you only have an agreement for Danbury, you can just amend the agreement and add Newtown and or Bethel right to the list with everyone's initials on it. So you don't need a new agreement every time you add a town.
Can you say a county?
I love that question. My answer to that question is no. Don't use Fairfield County. A lot of agents use Fairfield County. Now, here's why. Now, if you've taken Ignite before, you know this is the question I will ask, and so don't spoil it for everyone else if you know the answer because you've taken Ignite before. If you just happen to know the answers, well, then you're smart, and so we are not asking you to stay silent. Is the town of Sherman in Fairfield County?
No.
So we have one no. We have a lot of I'm not sure faces on. We have 2 no's.
I thought it was.
Yes, it is.
I think it is.
We have at least 2 yeses. Okay, let's move on from it. What about the town of Stratford? Is the town of Stratford in Fairfield County? So I see some nodding heads, some I have no idea.
Yes.
All right, so here's the point I'm looking to make. We live and work here, and many of us are uncertain as to whether or not certain towns are in or out of Fairfield County. If you have a buyer coming in from out of town and you sign them up for Fairfield County, and you yourself don't know which towns make up Fairfield County, is it really fair to hold them to the expectation that they would know what towns that actually means, right? There is court precedent for that, where a judge has ruled that says, yeah, you know what? It's not their, it shouldn't be the buyer's, the client's responsibility to figure out what you mean by your contract, right? You need to be clearer in your contract. Just by the way, Sherman and Stratford and Greenwich, those are the three corners of the triangle that make up Fairfield County. Sherman in the north, Stratford in the east, and Greenwich in the west. Right. So the answer to the questions were yes and yes. Right. I pretty much thought if I asked you if Greenwich was in Fairfield County, you'd all get that one. So I asked you the harder ones. Right. Does that make sense to everybody? So don't use Fairfield County, because there is precedent that if we have to use your document to get paid, judge could throw it out if it wasn't clear enough and the buyer bought in a town that they weren't sure you represented them in or not, right? That's at least a defense that could be brought. Number 3, term of the agreement. This agreement shall begin on blank and expire at midnight on blank. In a pending transaction, the agreement extends through the closing date. You're putting actual dates in there, right? You can't say starts on X date and expires to be determined. You need actually 2 dates, right? Generally speaking, people are signing contracts with buyers for 3 to 6 months. I'm not a massive fan of the 6-month thing. I'm really not a fan of a year. I like 3 to 4 months. I think 6 months sends the wrong message to the buyer, personally, right? Signing them for a 6-month contract sends the message of either we're going to spend a lot of time shopping for a whole lot of houses and spend a lot of time doing it, or it sends the message, hey, you know what? I'm not as great at my job as maybe I should be, so therefore I'm going to pad the contract time period just in case. I would prefer that we work with people in a time frame that really is allotted for someone to find a house. There's no reason that a buyer can't find a house in 21 to 30 days. You add kind of 60 to 75 days for a closing on that. A contract for 90 to 120 days really should not be seen as unreasonable. And I think you'll get better agreement from people if the term is more reasonable, right? People look at 6 months, they're like, okay, what, like, are you going to put a ring on my finger as well? Like, what is this? So I kind of like the shorter versions, and I think the shorter versions keep us accountable to doing the job that we say we're going to do, right? Someone signs a 6-month agreement and we forget about them for a while. Well, are we really being accountable, or are we saying, you know what, they're signed to me, they can't go anywhere, right? So consider that. Paragraph 4, broker's duties. Broker agrees to attempt to locate a property acceptable to buyer, negotiate on buyer's behalf, and act in the best interest of the buyer at all times, right? So there's term number 3, paragraph number 4, which outlines our duties to them. It's a quick version of we're your fiduciary, right? Number 5, the buyers, yes.
Rick, going back to the question about the towns, putting the
Yep.
towns in. So does that mean you have a contract with someone, they've said, okay, I want to look in Brookfield, Newtown, and Middlebury. You write that in, you're showing them properties, and then one weekend they decide to just go out with their spouse and stop in at a couple open houses. Didn't tell you, didn't anything. Fell in love with a house in Middletown. Decided, yep, love it. Like, let's get on this. We're gonna right here start, say we're putting in an offer, this and that, talking to that agent that's right there running that open house.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that the contract that they have with you is now pretty much completely null and void because they were out of the geographic
No, the contract they have with you is 100% valid and enforceable
Okay.
inside of the territory that you've outlined. Can you enforce your contract in Middletown? No. Because your contract was for Newtown, Bethel, and Middlebury, I think you said, right? So
Right.
if they
Right.
purchase a property in the town that you validly represent them in, well, then you're due a commission. If they purchase outside of the towns you represent them in, then you're not due a commission.
Interesting. Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome. Paragraph 5, buyer's duties. The buyer agrees to A, tell broker about all past and current contacts with any real property or any other real estate agents. You'll notice that's in big bold print, right? We're gonna get back to why in just a second. B, utilize broker exclusively in following up leads or information about a property, no matter what the source of that lead is. Cooperate with the broker and be reasonably available to examine real property. Upon request, give broker financial and personal information regarding buyer's needs and ability to purchase. And E, schedule all appointments to see a property exclusively through the broker. So that's the buyer's duties back to us. Now, 5A is important, right? Tell broker about all past and current contacts with any real property or any other real estate agents. I'll tell you a quick story. I had an agent about a year ago call me and say, I don't know what just happened. I was meeting with a buyer to take her out. She really freaked out on me because as we were going through the contract, she read 5A and was really upset because in her world, in her mind, she looked at that and said, what right do you have to ask me what I've done in the past? Why is it any of your business who I've been out with? Why is it any of your business what I've done, what I've seen? And the agent had no answer for her. So she called me and said, would you mind talking to her? Because I guess what the agent said was, you know, look, I'm not 100% sure why that's written there. Would you mind talking to our broker to work that through? The woman agreed to that, left, didn't go out that day. She and I spoke later that afternoon. And I said, how can I help you? And she said, well, she repeated the same thing. I'm not sure I understand why it's any of your business to ask me. What right do you have to ask me about my past and current contacts with real property or other real estate agents? It's absolutely none of your business. And I said, the two words that fix everything, I understand. May I explain to you why that's there? And she said, yes, I absolutely. And I said, well, it's there for your protection. She got kind of quiet. And I said, can I go on? And she said, yes, please. And I said, well, that's written because if we don't ask you about what you've done previous to you showing up and hiring us to move you forward, and you have signed another one of these with someone else, you could be at risk of owing at least one commission to an agent that doesn't help you buy a house. So we asked that question to protect you, protect your money, and make sure that you don't end up with legal entanglements that you weren't even certain you could get into. Well, she was very appreciative that I helped explain that, right? And I tell you that story for two reasons. The first is to model for you how you might answer that question, right? We ask you about that because we are looking to protect you. If you say to me, well, I was literally just out yesterday with somebody over at Coldwell Banker, well, we're going to have some conversations around that. Did you sign a contract? Where is it valid for? Was it valid for just a property? Because and I think, John, you mentioned this, but we didn't talk about that. In number 2, you could also list property by property, right? Sometimes when you're meeting a new buyer for the first time, if they're not willing to get married right away for a longer period of time, for a whole town or for a number of towns, you could still create comfort for everyone by making sure that they are represented for the 4 houses that you were showing them that day, right? So if that were the case, you may want to just put you could squeeze it all in there. You could just put a little asterisk and say, see addendum, type it down on a sheet of paper and have everybody initial the addendum and the contract so that the other piece of paper with the list of of addresses becomes a part of the contract. But here's the other reason I tell you that story back to 5A. The other reason I tell you that story is because after she was appreciative, she asked me a question that then I couldn't answer. She said to me, I so appreciate you explaining that to me. I'm curious, why wasn't the agent I met with able to give me that same answer? It's not a bad question, right? And so again, one of the reasons that we go through this line by line with you is because I know for a fact that there are some people who are meeting with people who don't know what this says, and they have no idea how to explain why this is a benefit to a buyer instead of handcuffs to a buyer. Number 6, other terms and conditions. So 6 has a couple of interesting items in it. 6A, buyer agrees that broker may represent other buyers and show other buyers the same property that broker shows to the buyer. Buyer needs to realize that if any of the firm's buyer clients have interest in a particular property, that information is considered to be confidential and will not be disclosed to any other clients. So 6A basically outlines the fact that, look, you're not our only client. You're not my own personal only client, and you're not the only client of the brokerage. And we're putting them on notice that says, look, we just because we show you a property doesn't mean that we might not represent other people who are interested in that same property. By the way, if somebody else we represent is interested in that property, or even is making an offer on that property that you're making an offer on, all of that information is considered confidential. We can't share that with you. I will tell you that doesn't happen terribly often, but it does happen. And it's a struggle for a lot of agents because agents feel like they have a responsibility to say to both clients, look, I just want to go on record as saying, I represent you, we're writing an offer on this property, but I also represent somebody else who's also writing an offer on this property. Guys, you can't do that, because the second you intimate one way or the other that you represent somebody else, you've broken the fiduciary responsibility of confidentiality with that other buyer, right? They have a right to confidentiality. They don't have a right to have their business blabbed to another buyer that you represent. Just because you feel guilty that both parties should know doesn't mean it's the right path. And that's ultimately what drives us to say things to buyers that we shouldn't say, is because we do it and we end up feeling guilty, like somehow we're cheating on both. That's where wearing your objective hat comes in. You have to kind of represent each client separately. I often get asked in a scenario like that where you represent 2 offers on the same property, what are you saying to the buyer? Like, are you saying to the buyer, like, there's another offer, we have to make this strong? What are your thoughts about that?
It goes back to what you said the other day about really letting them make the decision on that. Yeah, I think you were talking to Nicole about that on one of her offers. I forget the exact line of logic you sort of had, but you really sort of laid out, what their options were and really let them be the deciding factor.
Well, here's the thing. If John's the listing agent, right, and I have an offer from Nicole and an offer from Margaret, like Nicole's my buyer client and Margaret's my buyer client, and both offers are going in to John, the listing agent. Here's the craziness of that. Until John tells me that there are multiple offers. Now, I want you to hear how crazy this is, right? Clearly, I know there's more than one offer because I wrote 2 of them. But until John tells me from the seller that there are multiple offers on this property, I cannot go back to Nicole or Margaret and disclose there are multiple offers and that they may have to raise their offer or whatnot. I have to treat each of them in a bubble. I have had to, in the past, I've had to walk up to a listing agent and say, I have 2 offers. I represent 2 clients. Here's an offer from each of them. By the way, I need for you to get the okay from the seller to call me back and tell me officially there are multiple offers. The listing agent looked at me like I had 7 heads. I said, what are you talking about? You know those multiple offers. You wrote 2 of them. I said, yeah. And my buyer agreement with each of the clients that I represent does not allow me to share that information with them until it comes from you in the form of a response from the seller. So if the seller chooses to respond to both buyer clients with, look, there's multiple offers, we want to do a highest and best, or we want to see if you want to, adjust any terms or whatnot, now I can take the information back. But in a normal scenario from the rules of agency, I represent Nicole separately and I represent Margaret separately, and I can't allow the knowledge that I have about the fact that I know that I have another offer written to influence the way I talk with Nicole or Margaret. It has to come from the listing agent back to the client, and then I can start having those conversations. I'm still not able to disclose to Nicole or to Margaret, my buyer clients, that I represent the other one. And the question I get often asked is, so if that's the case, and Nicole gets the house, sorry, Margaret, you're out, right? Nicole gets the house. Won't Margaret find out at some point that I represented the buyer who bought the house that she wanted to buy? And my answer to that is, yeah, sure, maybe. It's a small world, right? Everybody seems to know each other. Social media connects everybody, whether you like it or not. And so the question becomes, well, won't Margaret be mad? Well, I certainly hope not. Margaret certainly has a right to be mad if she so chooses. And I have a right to remind her that our contract prohibited me from disclosing that information from her, right? Please review 6A. That prohibited me from telling you that I represented another property. And you consented to the fact that that was a possibility. Isn't this business fun? Right? That's one of those crazy, crazy opportunities that sometimes happens, where you have to remember what the rules of representation say and what the contract says so that you don't cross any lines. Yeah, Margaret.
I will say, Rick, I think this is an important conversation because given how tight the market is, I do have buyers looking at the same property. So
Yeah.
I don't think I think it's likely it could happen to any of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, buyers looking at the same property is almost a guarantee right now because there's so little inventory, right? Making offers on the same property is probably there's a higher chance that happens in a market like today than normal. So yeah, absolutely. 6B. 6B or not 6B? No, that's not how that goes, is it? 6B, broker may share and disclose non-confidential information about the buyer with other agents who offer property for sale. The thing I want to underline for you here is the term non-confidential, right? We can share all non-confidential information. So how do you know what's confidential and what's not confidential? I have a thought to share with you. What I would do is just treat everything as if it's confidential. That way you don't have to keep a mental list about what is confidential, what's considered non-confidential. Just treat everything about your buyer as confidential and have a conversation with them around using it in a cover letter. Make sure it's okay. Again, if I'm representing Margaret and she's given me some financial information or whatever data she has and someone asks me for it, even though it might not necessarily be considered confidential information, I'm going to ask her and get her okay before I share it with anybody. For me, it was easier just to treat every single thing a buyer client or a seller client said as confidential and get their permission before I opened my mouth instead of figuring out keeping 2 lists in my head. Or I'll tell you another quick story. About 6 months ago, I had a buyer call me and he said, look, I'm calling not to complain really. I bought a house from one of your agents recently and I loved her. I thought she was great. She was excellent at what she did. My kids loved her. Everyone loved her. But there was one thing that happened during the transaction that bothered me and I thought you should know about it. And I said, oh, I'm thrilled that you called. Tell me the story. And he went on to say that in a cover letter that she had written on their behalf, right, which we encourage you to do when you're working for the buyer, right? Write a nice cover letter, outline what's going on with the buyers, regardless of what the MLS says about the cover letters. right? I encourage you to utilize them because I've watched them work for 20 years. And so this particular buyer said, she wrote this cover letter and wrote in the cover letter that the buyers, Mr. and Dr. Smith, whatever their name was, right, were interested in purchasing the property and they had 3 kids and they this, that, and the other thing. And so he's describing this all to me and I'm thinking, okay, I'm not sure I see the issue yet. So we got to the end of the story and I said, I understand what in all of that was concerning to you. And he said, well, she indicated that we were Mr. and Dr. Smith. And I'm concerned that because she said that my wife is a doctor, which she is, right? She wasn't lying about it. Because she said my wife is a doctor, it could have put us in a negative position with negotiations because a lot of people think doctors make a fortune and it could have put us in a bad way. Now, it turns out it didn't, right? It turns out she doesn't and it didn't and everything was fine, but it bothered him enough that he made the phone call. And after he said it, I thought about it. I apologized and talked about, mentioning that back to that agent. And actually thought about it some more. I actually called him back about a week later and said, I'm really grateful that you shared that with me because I think it's something that I will need to share with all of the agents in my brokerages, because it's a comment on something so small that it could have had an effect, right? And she didn't do it because she was trying to blab about who she was, but again, it was enough that it made me think twice about it for the future as well. To that, I tell the story now every time I teach Ignite or the buyer contract, because it's a relevant conversation to have. So just treat everything as if it's confidential. If you're writing a cover letter, have the buyer look at it first and say, hey, I'm going to send this with your offer. What do you think of it? Questions on that? All right, 6C. Buyer understands this agreement is an exclusive appointment of broker, supersede any open right to represent that might be signed. Buyer represents the buyer is not currently bound by any other exclusive agreement, right? And again, in big bold print, buyer agrees not to enter into another exclusive agreement with any broker until this agreement has terminated, right? So we're doing everything we can to warn people, look, once you say yes to us, you can't say yes to anybody else because it could put you in financial jeopardy, right? There are obligations that go along with this document as outlined in paragraph 7 about how we get paid that don't just go away because you decide to go and sign an agreement with somebody else with overlapping either time period or territory.
Hey, Rick, quick
Yes.
question for you on that. Is there, or do you suggest an amount of time? So if we encountered a scenario where we find a buyer and we present them with this agreement and they say, oh, I really like what you have to say. I am working with so-and-so. I plan to terminate that one, tomorrow. Should we wait a week? Are we good to go the next day? Like, how do we make sure that we protect the client and our reputation?
Yeah, so great question. So if someone says to you they're currently represented, for all intents and purposes, your conversations stop, right? In terms of representation, and what you can advise that person is, look, until or unless you're no longer represented, our conversations can be about what I can provide for you in the future, and no more. You can't advise them about how to get out of their contract, right? You can't say things like, well, maybe you should have your attorney call to cancel, or call your agent and tell them you want to cancel. Let me send you an outline of something I think that works when you use it to cancel. Because remember, this is an agency relationship, and so you advising someone how to cancel an agency relationship could be construed as what's called tortious interference with an existing agency relationship, and that's problematic, right, for you. So we are unable to advise people how to break it or that they can break it. Instead, we can simply say, if the time ever comes that you are no longer in a contractual relationship with that brokerage, I'm happy to represent you. please keep me posted.
So in that scenario where you say that, they ask you, you give them that answer, you end the meeting, you go your separate ways, and they call you back the next week and say, hey, I terminated so-and-so, yesterday. Are you then cleared and to just go ahead and sign and work with them from that day? Or is there a window of time you should allot?
Yeah, no window of time. What I would ask for is, so that's great. I'm happy to represent you moving forward. If you could forward to me the release that the previous brokerage passed to you, so that we can just kind of coordinate dates, and then you date your new agreement for the day after the other one was terminated. Then you're all set.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Is there another question? Effie, did you have a question on that?
Yeah, how do you feel about carve outs? So, this in this area except for this town.
So do you mean that you would,
Like if you were already signed to Stamford, but you said, and I know you don't like Fairfield County, but in New York, you can say, for example, like Rockland, Westchester County, but excluding this town.
Yeah, so what I would say is, in that scenario, if you meet a buyer who's already signed for Greenwich and New Canaan, right? And what they've decided is they don't really want to live in Greenwich and New Canaan. They want to start looking in Stamford, Norwalk, and Darien. You can certainly sign an agreement with them for Stamford, Norwalk, and Darien. I would just ask to see their other contract to make sure that there's nothing overlapping, again, to protect them. So you can certainly, I think the carve out comes from when you talk about a larger area minus something else. And I'm going to encourage you not to utilize the county with a carve out. Instead, instead of a carve out, I would talk about it as like a carve in, right? You go ahead and list all the towns that you will represent them in, knowing that they're already represented over here. You can even be clear if they're represented in those two towns by someone else. You can be clear in your agreement that says, we represent you in Stamford, Norwalk, Darien, excluding Greenwich and New Canaan. You could do that if you wanted to just have clarity around this is not overlapping. Does that answer that?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you.
6D, this agreement may be terminated if the agreement expires. The buyer and the broker agree to terminate this agreement in writing, and the broker also reserves the right to reassign the contract to another agent in the office or by referral outside of the office. So based on 6D, let me ask you this: can you be fired by a buyer?
Yes, but they can't fire the company, right? Like they could ask to speak with another agent.
Yeah, so that's kind of how that works, right? Generally speaking, if someone says I'm unhappy with you, we don't typically terminate contracts, right? This is a bilateral contract. It needs the approval of both me as the party of the brokerage and the buyer, right? So when the buyer calls and says, I don't like you anymore, I'm terminating our agreement, you get to say, I understand that you may be looking to terminate your agreement. You'll need to speak to the broker, who generally speaking does not terminate contracts, will reassign you inside of the office, right? I can tell you that people don't typically like that, and I'm okay with that, because part of my job is to protect you and your commission, and we have a valid contract that states that unless I agree to it, the contract does not get terminated, and it states right there how we remedy this, right? The remedy is we reassign inside of the office. It's always fun to me when I offer that and they said, oh no, thank you, we appreciate that, but we just want to terminate. And so no, I understand. I did hear that request the first time. I'm simply not offering that. What I'm offering is reassignment. And it's funny because almost always people go down the path of, well, I have a very bad taste in my mouth and no one at Keller Williams can help me. Like, really? So with a brokerage of 510 agents, you had a bad experience with one that kind of ruins it for all 509 of the rest of us? Come on, give me a break, right? And so we go ahead and we reassign.
So has that happened a lot? Or when you were saying that, the first thing I was thinking is, oh, I have a friend who's an agent and I want to just send this over to my friend or something, versus maybe there really wasn't a conflict. I'd be curious what you've seen.
Well, yes, that's why I'm relatively inflexible on that, because what I have learned over time is that clients who want what they want typically will say anything to get what they want. And I don't mean for that to sound pessimistic at all. I don't mean for it to sound that way, but it's just a valid statement based on my experience, is that sometimes they'll puff up the whole reason why they want out, right? And you're sitting there scratching your head thinking, what? I don't understand. I was just out with this person on Sunday, and like their cousin got their license. And instead of calling and saying, look, my cousin got their license, is there anything we can do? They lie and say, I want to, you're not working well for me. You don't understand me. You're showing me houses I don't want, whatever. You said this, you did that. I want to terminate. And so I don't terminate. And what's fascinating is that when I take the hardline stand on not terminating the contract, almost always the truth will come out. Because at some point, people say to me, well, I'm not going to buy anyway. Okay, great. Then it doesn't matter if we terminate it or not. You can just wait out the contract. Well, but the contract goes until March. Yes, I understand that. You just said you weren't interested in purchasing any longer. Well, that's not true, right? What's really true is that they made an offer with somebody 3 days ago, and now they're panicked because they're in this bind because they did something they weren't supposed to do, right? I have that literally happening right now. An agent called me yesterday and said, someone who I signed 2 weeks ago went to an open house this weekend, made an offer with the listing agent, and it's accepted. Said, okay, well, call them back and let them know that they're in a bind, because now the seller's only going to pay one buyer's agent. And there are 2 buyer's agents who now need to get paid. So you need to let them know that they have an obligation to pay us. So now, of course, the listing agent wants to pay our agent a referral fee. And my answer to that is, well, no, I'm not sure they're willing to accept a 25% referral fee, right? They signed a contract that says we're due 3%. So who's going to make that up? Listing agent, you could certainly insert us now at the last minute and we'll finish the rest of the transaction, or you could pay us 50% of the commission as a referral fee, pay us the full buy side as a referral fee if you want to keep the client. That might work. Or the transaction might fall apart because the buyers will say, oh, I can't afford to pay them $12,000 and buy this house, right? It's not my fault. It's not your fault when people make stupid decisions, right? Anywho, so I think we're out of time for the evening. We are. We're going to pick up. So 6E, just so we finish the page. 6E, this agreement may be modified, waived, or discharged only by written agreement, right? And at the bottom, it states the amount or rate of real estate broker compensation is not fixed by law. It's set with each broker and may be negotiable between you and the broker. And that sets us up for a conversation on Monday about page 2 on this, which is paragraph 7, which is all about the professional service fee, about how we get paid, right? So we'll work through all of the options that exist in here and how you can present them on Monday. Then we'll go back over the close for the agreement script, talk a little bit about the tail end of getting people appointments and how you're doing that. I gave you a lot of tips on showings already, right? And keeping things clear. And then we're going to dive right into the anatomy of a buyer transaction, right? Right now, I'm looking at Monday and Wednesday. We'll see where we are on Monday about Wednesday, whether Wednesday is actually necessary. I do not think we will need Friday. So minimally will be Monday and Wednesday next week for your planning purposes, but we may get through enough on Monday that we graduate. Do remind me before we finish to tell you the cat house story. It's how I end every single Ignite, and I want to make sure that you guys get it as well, because it's a worthwhile story. I'm not sure if anybody on the call has heard, or maybe Eric has heard it, maybe John's heard it. It's a good story. So stay tuned to the end. It's worth hanging to the end to hear my cat house story. All right, guys, have a great weekend. Sell lots of houses. We'll see you on Monday.
Bye, thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.